All right, so we got the 1 minute countdown. Good luck. Hope you're gonna do great. No worries.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Normalizing Immigrant Narratives. Today, we're going to talk about supporting our immigrant students and their families. While we will not regularly monitor the chat, you're welcome to introduce yourselves and build community through the chat feature. All the links and resources that we will share today will be linked within a QR code towards the end of the presentation. Of course, the session is being recorded, so if there's anything that you miss, it's all right, because you'll be able to reference the recording at a later date. But we do encourage you to take notes if that's something that you'd like to do. And so just wanted to quickly introduce ourselves. So my name is Leslie Lohr. I'm the Associate Director of Student Empowerment within the Division of Multilingual Learners here at New York City Public Schools. If you are familiar with the Dream Squads initiative, we've probably met in the past. If you have applied for next year's cohort, then we probably will be in communication soon. And I do want to have my colleague Shin introduce herself. If you've been to any of our recent community chats or to the recent Multilingual and Immigrant Family Conference, you're also probably familiar with her as well. So handing it over to Shin to kick us off.
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning, all. Welcome everybody to this space. My name is Xin Gao. I'm the Director of Community Empowerment from Multilingual and Immigrant Student Service. And if you have been to Community Chat, Professional Development Series, or Family Conference, or if you are going to Educator Conference happening next Tuesday, I will be seeing you there. Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you all attending this training today. Leslie. Oh, it's mine. All right, so today's workshop, I would like to have two objectives for you. So I would like all the participants to understand the experience of immigrant students and their families, as well as the challenges they encounter navigating the immigration and educational system in United States. And also after today's 45 minutes, I would like you to walk away with an understanding of inclusive language and environments and reflecting on ways to facilitate the conditions that honors students' diverse needs and contributions.
All right, thank you, Shin. And so this video that we are gonna watch about microaggressions might be a little bit triggering for some. It does center on how, depending on how our identities are perceived, we may have to navigate through microaggressions or acts of racism or prejudice on a day-to-day basis. And so as you watch this video, think of what resonates with you, what biases show up, and whether any of the examples are things that either you've lived through or have witnessed within or outside of your schools. And again, you feel free to use the chat to build community with each other. Given the number of people attending this session, we might not be able to regularly monitor it, but definitely feel free to build community.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem,
Oh, you're so well spoken.
just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. life. But if you're only bitten every once in a while,
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date,
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
going grocery shopping,
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
commuting to work,
So when are you gonna have a baby?
watching TV,
We have to keep the Redskins name. It's part of our culture and history.
or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice. I have shared.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try less challenging, Major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
Ah,
For people who still
go back to the slideshow. All right, and so that video visually showcased, you know, how some of us may experience quote unquote more mosquito bites than others, more acts of microaggressions than others based on our actual or perceived identities, which is a great segue into this idea of intersectionality and into this intersectionality wheel that shows how each and every one of us have multiple identities. And depending on which identities we hold, we experience joy as well as challenges in the form of isms that cannot be ignored or separated from who we are. So like sexism, racism, ableism, all of the isms that we cannot divorce from our identities, right? And so this is key to understanding that when we focus on serving our most vulnerable students, we are casting a wide net that reaches most of the students, if not all of them, within our school building. So when we aim to support our multilingual immigrant and undocumented students, they're coming in with layers of identity. Immigrant students, undocumented students have many identities. They're not just an immigrant student. They're not just undocumented. They're not just developing their English language skills for some of them. For example, you can have an undocumented student that identifies as Black, is also queer, is also Muslim, and may also be a student with a disability. So there's different layers of identity. And when we serve our most vulnerable students, we are making sure that we are serving the majority, again, if not all of our school community, right? And so just as an example of ways that, you know, in our day-to-day lives, something may have been created to help a specific population, but all of us benefit. So for example, an elevator, right? We might not have a mobility impairment, but all of us can use an elevator for different reasons, right? And so we urge you to make sure or to work on creating practices in a school environment that is inclusive. So within a school environment, an example is a care closet, right? That some of our schools have created. Initially, it had been for addressing the fact that there are students in temporary housing or transitional housing. There might be newcomers in your schools, and you may have created a care closet because of that, but everybody in your school community can benefit from it, right? There is no one face for who represents an immigrant or an undocumented student. There are people, there are students in your schools and families who might not be, you know, identify as an immigrant or undocumented family, but they can benefit from a care closet because they might be struggling in some way or another, right? So understanding intersectionality comes from our legal scholar, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. And she emphasizes the importance of acknowledging and understanding that the different identities do converge. And we need to make an extra effort to identify and support our multilingual learners and our English language learners whose identities lie at the intersections of society's most historically excluded groups. So, I just said a lot of things, but like, how does that look like in practice, right? In your schools, when you're talking to your colleagues, other teachers, other parent coordinators, guidance counselors, principals, assistant principals, et cetera, right? An example could be looking at your school data with an intersectional lens, right? Looking at your multilingual learner data across race, language, gender, subgroup statuses such as SIFE, which are students with interrupted formal education, and even your newcomers and their proficiency level. And not just proficiency level in English, but also proficiency level in their home language, because our students are coming in with different levels of proficiency, right? Like a Spanish speaking person from a different country or a student, they could be able to speak it, but they might not be able to read it, things like that. That's something to keep in mind. And so prioritizing strategies and programming, for example, for the home languages represented in your schools is really important, because you want to ensure that your resources are translated, that your resources are accessible to everybody in your school community, right? Including undocumented members of your community, including immigrant and multilingual members of your community. You want inclusivity without pushing for anyone to necessarily out themselves. In the DOE, we do not ask about immigration status. It is against our policy. That is not something that we do. And so we want to make sure that when we create resources, that when we create programming, that it is already inclusive, that we have this population in mind. And again, everyone in your school community can benefit. Okay, and so I mentioned that your school staff, of course, should be definitely welcoming to all students. Definitely keeping in mind prioritizing the experience of multilingual and immigrant students. The day-to-day interactions that you have with your students and families are very important. That interpersonal connectedness is super helpful and useful to build trust. But aside from that person-to-person interaction, it's also what is visually represented in your schools, right? What are on your bulletin boards? What kind of flyers do you have up? What identities are represented within your school building's walls, right? And so on the screen, you're seeing images, right? You're seeing artwork that is from an artist, an activist named Julio Salgado, who wanted to create art based on the two identities that he felt were more at the forefront for him, and that is being undocumented and also being queer. And so those two things he wanted to be able to put in artwork, right? Because maybe he wasn't seeing that in his day-to-day life, and he wanted other people who also identified with those two identities to be like, oh yeah, that's me too, right? And so we do need to lean into images and language and identity markers that show us and remind us that we're not a monolithic people, right? Our students, our communities, ourselves, we have so many identities, and you never know what that could do, the power of an image can do for a student who walks into your school for the first time, for example, and they see something in their language and they see something that represents them. Like even the clip art that you might use, trying to make sure that it is different shades of skin color, for example, within your people clip art, so that a student could be like, oh, like I see myself within that image. And so, yeah, again, making sure that our spaces are inclusive just as much as how we interact with our families and students. Okay. And so this next video is set during the previous presidential administration during the pandemic. So it's a couple years ago, where we saw a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment. And even though, this was done a couple years ago, it's still very relevant to today, especially as we're welcoming new New Yorkers into our city and into our classrooms. And so these are young poets who are talking about the experience of receiving that anti-immigrant sentiment, where they may have been born in another country, but their whole lives have been in the US, and their parents are from another country, but they're here. And so they're trying to navigate between like, where do I belong, right? Where is home? And so as you watch the video, think about what words or feelings come to mind. Again, feel free to put it in the chat so that you are able to engage in conversation with each other.
At the end of the day, when there is no work left to do,
when exhaustion is all that our legs can feel, we all want to get home.
but where do we go when home tells us to leave?
My grandma once told me, nunca olvides cuál es tu verdadera casa.
Never forget where your true home is.
Grandma, I'm not in the place that saw me grow,
But I will never dust my country's dirt off my shoulders.
She always reminds me where I come from. I come from trajes típicos, from frijoles y tortillas hechas a mano,
From brown skin and thick accents.
I tell grandma I'm not welcome in my new home.
Refugees!
When mi gente finds a way to keep their families stable, they label us
Dirty immigrants!
We did not want to leave, we did not want to run.
Asylum seekers!
But the alternative is watching your 3-year-old neighbor selling chicles next to El Mercado Negro, afraid to wake up with guns at our heads telling us,
Give me your money! Is that all you got? They blame us for taking away jobs that no one wants, for risking our lives to make theirs more convenient.
my grandma tells me,
no one will ever be able to build a wall between us.
I say, grandma, in my heart,
I will never belong here.
She says,
Tu casa te espera.
Your home waits for you.
But grandma was missing something.
She never told me that one day my own true home
would chase me
To deserts,
rivers
and
and
She
borders.
never told me that home would give no other option but to run away.
My mother tells me that home is her grandmother's tortillas. It is walking down to the river to get water.
Home is one pair of shoes. Why go back to cold?
Candles and caves
When here we have convenience.
Here we have enough money for closets of clothes and 3 cars. Here we are comfortable. My parents work 7 days a week. Too worried about bills to pay, too tired to play. We plan to get away. On vacation, we go home.
I never met the parents of my father.
But their
Image was embedded into your mind.
He would tell me stories of his land.
Acres of nature that only he and his people could traverse.
Peaceful.
But war comes with the tide.
Hate, waves of hatred he strive.
Raced him to the States.
And now he traces his shrapnel scars, like he'll find a path through the wounded flesh that will always remind him that he wouldn't be going back.
So instead,
He sits his children down and tells us about his name, Iwanyamwu.
tells us so we will love it.
Iwanyamwu.
So that our American tongues will feel at home under the roofs of our mouths.
Faulty roofs that have never sheltered the language of Igbo. I love my heritage. I listen to all of your stories attentively, but why don't you just say,
I want to go home.
at the end of the day, when there is no work left to do,
When exhaustion is all that our legs can feel.
We all want to get home.
but where do we go?
All right. So again, if you want to add any feelings or words that come to mind at the conclusion of this video, feel free. But there's a lot of themes here. The idea of trying to hold on to your home language and kind of like never meeting, you know, grandparents and things like that. I also wanted to emphasize how in this video, the students are diverse, right? The image of who an immigrant can look like is diverse, right? Anyone could be an immigrant. There is no one face of who can be an immigrant, right? And so definitely want to uplift that, because as you work with your students, there's no way that you're gonna know, right? Whose immigration status is what, and again, we never ask. And so wanted to highlight that, because again, we need to make sure that our practices, that our programming, that our resources are inclusive, so that everybody in your school community is able to access the information that they need, and you know, meet the goals that they want to meet, whether it's their personal, professional, or academic goals. And with that, so this slide is super important. If after today, all you remember is this slide, that would mean Shin and I are super successful at today's workshop. And so just wanted to uplift that words are so important. The language that we use to reference a person is super important. Language can either harm us or can uplift us, right? And so whether this is something you've heard on the news or in a newspaper or like have heard other people say, we just want to emphasize that there is no such thing as an illegal immigrant, right? No human being is illegal. It is so harmful to reference a person and tell them they are an illegal immigrant, right? And so just to clarify that, when a person decides to cross the border into the United States and they don't have legal documentation that allows them to be in the United States, the act of doing that is illegal. It does break the rules, but the person is not illegal. They are undocumented. They do not have the necessary paperwork. They're not they don't have the necessary paperwork that allows them to be in this country, whether that be a visa, whether that be a green card, whatever it might be, right? If a person, for example, enters the country with a tourist visa, for example, or another visa that has a time limit and they overstay their visa, right? They don't go back home. And now they are here without documentation. They are undocumented. They are not an illegal immigrant. They are an undocumented immigrant, right? And so we have some silly examples on the side, on the right. So just to like further clarify the point. So a pedestrian, and this happens a lot in New York City, we tend to cross the street when it's not our light, right? We don't wait for the walk sign, right? But we don't call a pedestrian who crosses the street when they're not supposed to an illegal pedestrian, right? What they're doing is against the rules probably, but they themselves are not an illegal person, right? Another example, a student that may skip class, right? Or skip school to go to Disneyland, right? Or go do something else, like they're not in school when they're supposed to be. They're not an illegal student. They cut class, that was wrong. Why they're cutting class, we're not sure, but they themselves are not an illegal student. So there are many, many reasons why we have people who cross the border without documentation and stay here. There's so many reasons for that. That's a whole different workshop, but just wanted to emphasize the point that at the end of the day, all of us are human beings, all of us are people, and we all deserve respect and dignity, right? And so making sure that we never, ever reference a person that is an immigrant as an illegal immigrant, all right? Because again, they deserve our respect, they deserve our dignity, they deserve dignity, and that word is so harmful. And so with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Shin to give us a little bit of history.
So this slides talk a little bit about the local history of how New York City has made effort to protect people with immigration status. So first, you can see at the very earliest in 1970, in 1975, yes. So during the civil rights era, our city's human rights law began to include national origin as a protective category in employment, public accommodation, and housing, and as well as educational institutions such as New York City Public School fall under public accommodations and must comply with city's human rights law. Then moving forward in 1989, the law expanded to include protected category of alienage and citizenship status, providing anti-discrimination legal protections for documented as well as undocumented immigrants alike. And then fast forward to 2019, in response to the widest anti-discrimination sentiment and actions of federal government at the time, the New York City Commission on Human Rights, which enforced the city's human rights law, released a landmark guidance on immigration and discrimination. So I'll drop the document in the chat. I'll also include it in the deck, but it is a legal document. It is a document that looks very dry, but it includes all the information we have. And also the use of alien in many laws refer to a non-citizen person. It is actually a term that may carry negative connotations, and it feels like dehumanizing immigrants, making them as others. So as discussed in the section 3 of this document, like use of certain language, including illegal alien and illegals, with intent to demean or humiliate or offend a person or person's constitution discrimination constitutes discrimination under the New York City human rights law. So even in my personal green card application, like federal laws use aliens, but this words is kind of sound like you are making people feel like they are others. So during our daily conversation, we want to avoid using that alien language. This is what our city's human rights law has done to try make that efforts to protect immigrants. Right, next slide. And on this slide, you will see the icons. These are the protective categories of the places. So in these places, there will be no ICE in. So you can see it's ICE and CBPs are prohibited at schools, at church, at ceremony. So on top of the slides, you can see the 6 icons. So it's pretty straightforward. And on the left of the slides, there's a quote from one of the family members. When I came to this country, I did not come here to stay. My kids were back in Jamaica. However, I was in an abusive relationship with my husband. This made the choice for me clear. I had to find a way to bring my children here and give them a better life. As a single mom, I was alone trying to support them. Today, I thank God we pulled through. We wish our status was different, but we pulled through and will continue to pull through.
Thank you, Shin. Just wanted to add. So, yeah, it definitely is very straightforward. So ICE and Customs and Border Protection, CBP, these are the areas that are protected areas where they are not allowed to enter. So they are not allowed to enter our public schools. They are not allowed to enter at hospitals, places of worship, a ceremony, like a wedding, a funeral, social services, and playgrounds. So these are the areas that are protected locations where ICE and CBP are not allowed to enter. And this is really important because sometimes our parents, our families may not want to come to your school, right? They may not want to go to even like a parent-teacher conference because they're afraid that if they go to your school, that somehow there will be law enforcement. They might confuse your security guards as law enforcement. So we wanted to highlight this because this is really important for everyone to know, and particularly your families to know what areas are protected areas. Back to you, Shin.
All right, thank you, Leslie. I think I do see some question in the chat. Is this the no ICE? Is it same for all administration? Parenthesis political. I want to say yes, but correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie. I think the 6 places ICE cannot be in is the same, right?
Yeah, ICE can't be in those.
Yeah, the rule goes across the same of all. All right. Okay, so normalizing immigrant narratives, like what to do and what not to do. So I feel like we are all, as educators, we all have great intentions to help families with different mixed immigration status. Sometimes we want to jump in and try to help. But let's be mindful of some words and some sentences that may carry some kind of assumptions. For example, first, why don't you just legalize? This is making assumption that people just don't want to do it, which is not true. If instead of just making that assumption and asking straightforward, why don't you just legalize? You can try to talk to them in an alternative way using the language such as, have you talked to an immigration attorney to find out if you have a pathway to citizenship? There may be immigration paths that you and your family don't know about it. And then provide them a vested list of organizations or immigrant organizations. And if the second one, if you go straight to a parent or family saying, are you illegal or undocumented? We want to make sure everyone do not use the word illegal and do not ask families to self-identify or assume someone's immigration status. In New York City public schools, no question should be asked for families' immigration status unless they tell you by themselves. Let the family identify on their own. We as educators, we do not ask them. And also we tend to send all communications in English. Well, instead of doing that, what we want to do is share some information in multiple languages and access an interpreter or digital tools to be able to communicate with families in their native language. You can always ask parents the preferred language first and then meet their needs. Especially with now, so many technology has been developed, there will be some convenient ways for educators to use some tool to translate like daily communicative language to the parents in their native language. I know sometimes it's harder to request a formal interpreter, even though that's the best option to go, but for the time being, or like right at the moment, there are definitely many other alternative ways we can use some tools to help us communicate with families in their native languages. And then the last one is share resources that are only applicable to citizens. So I want to use the example, this may be more relevant to upper high school, but this is just an example. For example, during like post-secondary college application, counselor may share information about FAFSA, but if a student is undocumented immigrant, they may not be able to apply for that scholarship or financial aid. So that is not relevant to them. Instead of doing that, we want to make sure when we share resources, we are inclusive of all the resources that are applicable to various range of immigration status at all time. So for undocumented high schoolers, there are many other ways they can apply for a scholarship that particularly designed for them, or there are other resources that they can use to help them, financial resources they can use to help them to pay for the college. If we share information, we want to include all those information in the packet to share out so everybody can find something that relevant to them.
All right, thank you, Shin. And so as we've said, we want to make sure that we are building trust, that we are creating a welcoming and inclusive school environment. Again, we don't pressure any student to disclose their status or the status of their family members or somebody that they know. We want to make yourself visible as an ally, whether that's in your schools, like hallways, or like, in your intake forms. It might be like a flyer that says, we are supportive of our immigrant and multilingual students. Make yourself an ally and visibly in some way. And normalize the idea that there are young people that don't have a citizenship status, right? It's something that's part of their lives and identities. And so, for example, within your school, you might be able to say, like, our school community is made up of people with different immigration statuses, Some of us are citizens, some of us are permanent residents, some of us are in the process of gaining legal status, some of us are undocumented, but regardless of what immigration status you might have, we are here to support you. We were here to treat all of you as, human beings with dignity and respect. And then creating community for students who might be feeling lonely, isolated, or in the shadows. This is just for any students in general, but particularly for your newcomers, right? Your newly arrived who might be developing their English language skills. This goes back to intersectionality. Figure out what other identity markers or like interests a student might have, whether it's like an art hobby or there's, they shared with you that they follow a specific religion, and try to create connections with the rest of the school community based on those intersecting identities, right? That they are willing to share with you, right? Embracing diversity by making sure that your curriculum does embed the immigration topics and language around immigration topics. So as much as we're telling you right today, not to use the word illegal, to say undocumented, your students might not know that. Their family members might not know that. And so making sure that that is embedded in your curriculum, for example, is super important. Because again, we are arming ourselves with knowledge. We want to give that knowledge to our students, to our families, because our students are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, right? And we want to create a more inclusive, empathetic world. And it starts with us, and it continues to build on through our students and beyond, right? And making sure that we involve all of our families, including immigrant families, but being very aware that some families may have mixed status designation, meaning that you could have a family where there are different immigration statuses represented. The student could be a citizen, the parent might be undocumented, the sibling might be in the process of gaining citizenship or whatever that might be. So making sure that you're, any programming that you have for families is inclusive of that, and that you are allowing them to have a voice and a say in your school community, because our immigrant students, our immigrant families have assets, okay? They can help us, build this welcoming, inclusive school environment that we're aiming to achieve. And the resource is on the right-hand side of the screen. That is also linked in the QR code that we're gonna see towards the end. And so we do have a few minutes left, so we're gonna quickly do this immigrant journey. This is a resource from Northwestern University's magazine, where it's kind of like a pick your own adventure, choose your own adventure situation, where we are going to envision ourselves in the shoes of a migrant, right? Depending on the time period. And then we're going to make decisions as if we were them. So we're going to take a few minutes to do this. I'm going to go ahead and click this. And so I'm going to pick Joyce. So here we are. We are Joyce. We are 8 years old. It is 1990. We are from the Philippines. We are coming to Chicago with our parents, and we think that we're just here for a 3-week vacation, right? 3-week visit with some of our family members, but you're not sure why. Your grandparents back in the Philippines were crying when you left to go to the airport. And so at the end of this trip, your parents ask if you want to stay in Chicago, but you know what? You had such a great time in the last 3 weeks that you say yes. And now we are undocumented, 8 years past. We're now 16 years old, right? And we need to apply for a driver's permit. We ask our parents for our social security card because we don't know that we are undocumented. We came to the US so young, right? So we don't know what's going on. And that is when they tell us, our father tells us that actually we don't have a social security card because we don't have the right visas to live in the United States. And so that's what's happening. So now what do? Do we buy a fake social security card, or do we just give up? And so since we're 16, we're a little bit afraid of what could happen. We're going to give up. We're not going to go for it. All right. And now we are in high school. We're getting great grades. We have difficult relationship with our parents. In our hearts, just like the poets, right? The US is our home. This is all we know. And we think, we work hard and we prove that we deserve to be here, that everything's going to be okay. But we can't even tell our friends our secret. We're keeping it to ourselves. We're living in fear. And so now it's 1999. We are seniors in high school. Our teacher, Ms. Phillips, is asking us about college applications and college options because we have a high SAT score. But we have been dreading this moment because we know we're undocumented and we don't think we can go to college, right? We don't know. So we're too scared to ask because that means that we have to share about our immigration status. And so now we have to decide, do we tell Ms. Phillips? Do we not tell Ms. Phillips? And so we decide, you know what, we trust Ms. Phillips. And so we're going to tell Ms. Phillips that we are undocumented. So yes, we're going to tell her. And so Ms. Phillips is sympathetic and she tells us, she reveals to us that we are not the only person in the school to have been undocumented and seeking college acceptance, right? And so she connects us to another guidance counselor that helped another student that was undocumented get into schools in Chicago. And she also wants to tell us that politicians want to introduce new legislation to protect young undocumented people like us, and that, you know, maybe one day we can achieve legal status. And so we talked to Mr. Wu, and now he says, oh, we can enroll in college. But we're like, well, how am I going to pay for it, right? Because we can't get state or federal aid in Chicago, but he does tell us about a private scholarship, right? And that allows us to go to school, to go to college, and also finance it. Well, we only have 5 minutes, but just to let you know, this goes on and on. It's just to give you a sense of like what a young person has to go through or can go through if they're not in a school that is inclusive, right? That is sharing these resources and they're readily available. Where a student, even though it ended up really well, right? Because she was able to tell Ms. Phillips, and then she connected us to Mr. Wu, and we were able to get connected to resources, but we had to out ourselves, right? We had to say, hey, like I'm undocumented, and we had to wait till we were seniors, right? In high school to figure out that we can actually go to college. This whole time we didn't think we could. And if we had just learned about this sooner, if our schools had told us about it without us having to say, you know, reveal a secret that could have gone either way. It could have been that the person would have reacted badly, right? And now it's like, oh, now you know this thing about me that I didn't really want to share, right? So this is the importance. I just want to highlight the importance of making sure our resources are diverse, are inclusive, and that they are readily available for everyone, because everyone can benefit from a scholarship, for example, that is open to anyone, regardless of immigration status. That means that even a student that is a citizen could apply for it, because immigration status is not a requirement for eligibility. Okay, so now going back to the slides, passing it over to Shin to talk about the resources.
So here's in the link, it's all our resources. I can't share my screen, but once you receive this back, you will be able to link to all the resources. We have multilingual immigrant student support site. In this site, we have resources for families, for students, and for educators. You should be able to find all the resources we've created, including, for example, post-secondary journey map and family guide for families that newly came to United States and wanting to navigate through our school system. And also multilingual learner info hub is a DOE login required website for DOE educators. We have all the policies and procedures for providing bilingual education or programs that serves multilingual students. And if you read through the policy and reference guide, these are all very long documents, but it lists out all the details of what the rights of our multilingual families and students. And we also have instructional resource and professional learning site. In this site, teachers or instructional educators will be able to access different workshops and all the resources that can support them to support the students in their classrooms. And if you click on subscribe to Multilingual Monthly for opportunities and updates, you should be able to get an email from our division every month, which lists all different opportunities for PD, for workshops, for professional development, and for other programming opportunities, initiatives, as well as new policy updates. And if you scan this QR code, it also includes more resources. So if you have any question, you can always email us at this email address. Everything should be included in this PowerPoint, and I'm sure the organizer of the event will be sending out this deck to everyone. So in this deck, all the videos have the link, all the resources you can click on. So you should be able to access everything we talked about today.
All right. And with that, thank you all for being here today. We hope that this was helpful to you. Let me actually stop sharing the screen so I could see maybe like what was said in the chat. I hope that we can save it. That would be great. But yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today. And we hope again it was helpful to you. And please subscribe to our newsletter. Please submit questions if you have them at dml@schools.nyc.gov. Thank you all. Have a great and wonderful day.